So many books, so little time.
If you've ever said, I really want to read the Bible, I just can't fit it all in.
Welcome to the club. This is the Bible Book Club.
We'll read it to you and help you make sense of the most important book you'll ever read. If you're new, and this is your first time joining us on Bible Book Club, I just want to say, go back and start at the beginning, because we are in the beginning, Genesis, the first book of the Bible, but we really started in the very beginning, which was chapter 1. So go back, listen to the overview, and then listen to episode 1 so that you can get a full understanding. You will read every word of the Bible here in Bible Book Club. So that was just a little disclaimer. And now, for those of you who are caught up with us, I'm going to give you a very quick catch up on where we are in our story today, because our characters, they've been busy. So you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So here we are. Abraham lied about Sarah again. Doesn't learn his lesson, that guy. Sarah and Abraham finally had a baby. That was Isaac. But Sarah takes a lot to make that lady happy. She didn't like Ishmael's mocking attitude. So Abraham picked up his oldest son, Ishmael, for a life unknown with no cell phones back then. No way to check on him.
Which is really sad. I just can't imagine.
Poor Ishmael.
Never thinking you're going to see him again.
Hagar, Ishmael's mother, ended up in the desert again in tears. Ishmael received a promise to become a great nation, and then he became the father of the Muslims, which are still today.
Yep.
And Abraham made a treaty with Abimelech and planted a tamarisk seed in the promised land.
That was a lot last
and
week.
And here we are.
And here we are in chapter 22, and we're going to cover 23 too. But this chapter 22 is one of those chapters that just has layers of symbolism. We could camp out here for a couple of weeks, actually. So we're going to go quick. It is extreme. It's an extreme chapter, and I titled it The Inconceivable Command and Last Minute Save, because God is about to do something kind of crazy. Our hero, Abraham, has finally overcome the infertility hurdle that has hindered him from God's promise. He has a son to fulfill his calling to become this great nation and as numerous as the stars. And this son, Isaac, is understandably precious to him. He had him very late in life. Never thought he would finally get here, and he's here. But is he too precious? The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. No one can do that if they love something else more. How much does Abraham love Isaac? Well, we're going to find out in this chapter, because God is going to test Abraham by asking him to do the inconceivable. And scene 1, we're going to read the inconceivable command. We're going to read it straight. I'm not going to interrupt Heather, because it's a sweet story and it's a test. And the test is fascinating because God's command and God's promise in this test are in diametrical opposition.
Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw a place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and wood are here, Isaac said. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood.
All right, so the first thing I just want to give you my off-the-cuff comments, because what the heck? Where was Sarah? Did he not tell her? Can you imagine that scene? What did he say? Like, hey, babe, Isaac and I are going to go on a little camping trip. And she would say, like, where? Where are you going? Well, you see, I got word from God, and he says, what is she going to say to him? She has waited forever.
There's no way
son.
he told her.
He must not, because we don't have a word from her.
Because that woman is intense.
Yeah, she is. I don't know if he sent her on a shopping spree or what, but she was nowhere to be found. She would have literally tied herself to the child.
Yeah.
And gosh, Heather, what was Isaac thinking?
I mean, he's probably scared.
Yeah, because he's being bound. He asks,
How
hey,
old
Dad.
is he in this scene?
Okay, so he is definitely not a baby, not a young child. He may have been like early tween age.
Oh, there is not a chance in the world that my son would have let me.
Your son's bigger than you.
Yeah. 6'3". He's 15.
Yeah, it would not have happened with your son. But again, yeah, I don't know what Isaac was. Obviously, Isaac was curious. The other thing is, so many questions. They journeyed for 3 days. So Abraham kind of had this in his heart, and that speaks a lot to him. And we're going to get into that. So the theme of this is the testing of your faith. And I think it is an amazing lesson for all of us, because we go through trials and we think, and people say, oh, well, God is just testing you. And that just, drives you crazy, because like, why would God test me this way? But in this case, he's testing Abraham's faith. Abraham has a huge calling on his back, and Abraham's had some ups and downs, but God is testing him. And remember, Abraham has been prepared. Think about where he's been. This was his test prep. Genesis 12, he's called to leave his home. He proved he loved God more than his father. Genesis 13, he has to let go of Lot, proving he loves God more than Lot. Genesis 18, he pleads for Sodom and lets go of Sodom. Genesis 21, he's still waiting for Isaac. Genesis 21 again, he lets go of Ishmael, proving he loved God more than Ishmael. Now he has to prove to God that he loves him more than he loves this long-awaited son, Isaac. Does he have the faith to obey? All right.
I'm thinking one more thing. A couple episodes ago, maybe it was 2 episodes ago, we talked about Abraham questioning God. And it's okay to question God, right? But he doesn't question him at all.
No.
And does that mean that he's now come so far in the things that he's learned, he's grown in wisdom?
Yes.
And he now just is blindly trusting.
Yes. And that is one of my points, because he doesn't. He is silent. I'm sure in his head, he was playing out every single scenario. Like, what does this mean? Why would God ask me? I'm going to cover that in a sec, because I want to get to why he wouldn't have just totally freaked out about this. So, but before I do, I want to talk about tests, trust, and traps. And this is a lesson for today. There's a difference between how God and Satan test us. Satan really tempts us. He's not testing us, but he is, because he's testing us. He's tempting us to test us to see if we'll fall trap. So tests versus traps. God tests us to prove trust. God's tests are opportunities to build our faith. If we pass a test, it builds our faith. Satan tests us to trap us. Satan's tests have the potential to destroy our faith. One builds faith, one destroys faith.
But these are very difficult things to discern. And
Yes.
usually, I don't know about you, but in my life, I usually can discern it afterwards and not ahead of time.
Hindsight is so much better than foresight.
It's hard.
Very hard. It's very hard. And it's also very hard if you're going through trials like somebody has cancer or something like that to see it as an opportunity to prove your faith. Mm-hmm. James 1:12 says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him."
Okay, so here's the question then. What trials have you conquered?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you write them down and you know that God has prepared you for whatever that test was, then are there tests that you maybe failed that Jesus is the only one who ever passed that test. So how can you use that to then help other people?
Exactly. And it's okay to fail tests, because again, Jesus was the only one who didn't.
Yeah, he's the only perfect person ever to walk the earth.
Exactly. As long as we grow. And it's okay in trials and tests to be sad, to grieve, but there is something God is teaching you in every trial, and latching onto that and really keeping your heart. All right. So let's get back to what you said before. Abraham's response was an act of faith. This is one of his shining moments. For sure, that will be mentioned again in Hebrews. So first know that child sacrifice was a thing. So if you think this is just a thing that was kind of God threw out there, like no one had ever heard of doing this. No, in Canaan, among the pagans, they had child sacrifices, but it was not acceptable.
Really?
Yeah, really. It was not in Canaan, but the Canaanites were not Israelites. So it wasn't acceptable for God's people. people. And it certainly didn't make sense for Isaac, the promised long-awaited child. The steadfast way that Abraham obeys speaks to his trust, although his instincts had to be screaming, no, this cannot be. God has lost his mind. This cannot be. I'm sure he was tortured in those 3 days of walking. Okay, second, Abraham is a different man now. He's grown into spiritual maturity, like you said. He has confidence that God knows what he's doing. It took him years to get to this point. And a lot of doubting, and like you said, a lot of questioning. He may have been questioning in his head, but he didn't have to really ask God. Third, Abraham has learned to trust God. He doesn't need to question anymore. That doesn't mean he wasn't confused or upset, and it doesn't mean you're not going to be confused or upset if you go through trials. In fact, I'm sure he didn't sleep all night. He was probably on his knees praying for God to change his mind. Even Jesus, on the night before he died, asked God to take this cup from me, and he was meaning death on the cross. It's a great example to us that it's okay and only human to not want to suffer or face trials. Even Jesus asked God, take this cup from me. If not, thy will be done. He would go through with it. But he begged. And remember, blood came out and sweat on his head. He was really praying hard. I don't want to do this.
If there's any other way, please.
Yeah. The other thing that's a part of this act of faith was Abraham obeyed. He had learned to trust and obey. As painful as every step was, he kept going.
And that's a really important point because you can use all of the experiences that you have as a growing opportunity.
Yep.
And it is hard, but he really went through all of those. He saw the results of not obeying. And so now he's just like, okay, God, I've been here before. I'm just going to do this, even though on that 3-day journey was probably the worst days of his life. I mean, you said he probably didn't sleep.
No.
My air conditioner breaks and then I stress all night and don't sleep because I'm worried about how much it's going to cost.
What is that song? What is that
significant.
Song? That song, Whatever Doesn't Kill You.
Makes you stronger.
Makes you stronger. Thank you for singing it because I'm terrible. All right. So why? He had faith, Abraham faith. Why did he go through this so well? Abraham had come to know God so well that he knew God would not break his promises. He was clinging to that promise. God had promised that his line would be built through Isaac. Therefore, he must have reasoned in his head that there must be something he didn't know. Perhaps God was going to stop him. Or perhaps, for all he knew, he could have been playing out the scenario that God was going to raise Isaac from the dead. The proof of Abraham's faith that Isaac would survive can be found in 2 verses that you just read. Verse 5, you read, we will worship and then we will come back to you. That's what he said to the servants when he left them. We will worship, then we will come back to you.
So it was like he knew, like he was a prophetic word.
He was saying, I believe Isaac is going to somehow come through this. And then verse 8, when he answered Isaac, he said, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. He knew God would provide, God would remain true to his promise.
Well, it's like when I'm watching season 2 of Outer Banks and I'm like, they can't kill her. She's the main character.
Yeah, that gives you comfort, huh?
Yeah. He was saying the same thing.
All right. Scene 2 is the last minute save.
Verse 10. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by his horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son.
So the immediate fulfillment of Abraham's faith and trust was the provision of a ram, a substitute for Isaac. But the ultimate fulfillment of Abraham's trust is the provision of the lamb, Jesus, the substitute for us. I want to talk about a theme here. And the theme of everything we just read and the words that we read is a foreshadowing of another father and son. So I'm going to do a comparison for you of Abraham and Isaac, the father and son in our story, and God and Jesus, the larger father and son in our story.
Okay, and here, I love when she does this because this is the tangible evidence that this is why we read the Old Testament. It is pointing us towards the New Testament and Jesus.
All right, Abraham and Isaac. Isaac was a descendant of Abraham. Jesus was also a descendant of Abraham. Isaac was conceived by divine intervention. The angel visited Abraham, and Jesus was conceived by divine intervention of an angel.
And the angel visited his mom.
Mary. Abraham offered his one and only son. And the words were so similar here. God offered his one and only son. And you read those words that I want you to take your son, the son you love, your only son, and sacrifice him. And that's what God said. This is my one and only son. Isaac carried the wood for the sacrifice. Jesus carried the cross made of wood for the sacrifice. Isaac questioned the father. Jesus questioned his father. Isaac was submissive and one with his father. He didn't even fight. And he was at an age where he probably could have put up a little bit of a tussle. Jesus was submissive and one with his father. Isaac escaped death after a 3-day journey. Jesus rose from the dead on the 3rd day. Abraham said God would provide the lamb. God provided Jesus the lamb. The lamb was a substitute for Isaac. Jesus, the Lamb of God, was a substitute for us. The ram was caught by its horns in a thicket. Jesus wore on his head a crown of thorns. Through Abraham's one son, Isaac, God grew the nation of Israel. Through this one son, Jesus, God grew the kingdom and the church. The sacrifice of Isaac was on a specific spot on Mount Moriah. Abraham named that spot, "The Lord will provide." The temple was built on the same spot on Mount Moriah, where all sacrifices were to be held in the Holy of Holies. When Jesus was crucified on the same mountain, the veil within the temple that was on that exact spot was rent in two. The Lord did indeed provide on that spot, on that mountain. He provided Jesus in his death on the cross.
Mic drop. Like, we could just stop the episode right now.
There's so much more too. I could go into a whole analysis of just the wood and what that symbolizes in the tree of life, but I'm not going to go there because I spent hours on this lesson. I was like, you could just go forever in this book, in this chapter. Keep going though.
Verse 14. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided."
Okay, we are going to park here for a second because this is so cool. Like I said, this temple was built on Mount Moriah, just on this, I'm going to get into it, this same place. So these words, "the Lord will provide," and "on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided," translate either "in the mount the Lord will appear," or "in the mount the Lord will provide." That's how they translate that one phrase. Now, let's take a closer look at the mountain where the Lord will either appear or provide, because that mountain is still here today. Mount Moriah is the place of the Dome of the Rock. So Mount Moriah is where Abraham sacrificed Isaac on the rock of Mount Moriah. There is a huge rock there. Remember, he said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the mountain I will show you." Mount Moriah is the site that David, many hundreds of years later, purchased. And here's the backstory for that, because we're not going to get to 2 Samuel 24 for a while.
It could be years from now.
It could, not years, but 2 Samuel 24 and again in 1 Chronicles 2 tell this story. And the short story on the story, I'm not going to read the whole thing, is this. David sins, and the consequence of his sin is God sends a plague. 70,000 people die in this plague. And just as the angel is about to strike Jerusalem, so the angel is moving through the land, killing people as a result of David's sin, and David is horrified. Right as the angel is about to strike Jerusalem, God stops him. Because David begs, God stops him. The place where he stopped him was the threshing floor, the rock of Araunah the Jebusite, located on Mount Moriah. David sees the angel of the Lord there, and he buys the place from Araunah to build an altar to the Lord. So now the rock is in possession of the Israelites. Now remember, David is not allowed to build a temple, a resting place for the Ark of the Covenant, because his hand has seen too much death. That privilege is given to Solomon, his son. Solomon decides to build the temple on the rock.
The same
on Mount
place.
Moriah. The same rock that he already owns because his father David had purchased it. 2 Chronicles 3 says this, Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the place provided by David.
Now, if you were not tracking with us, you may not remember because we haven't read this part yet. So that's all something coming up in a future episode of the Bible Book Club.
Correct.
Several generations from now.
Yes, because David is the son of 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 Abraham.
Just wanted them to know.
Yep. Just so you know, we are fast forwarding quickly here. So so Mount Moriah also, and again, I'm putting a map of Mount Moriah and the temple in the show notes so you can see this. So this is where David has kind of built his kingdom around this mount. It's surrounded by valleys. It was very easily protected, and that's why David built it up there. And it's where he lived. So this is where Jerusalem was built, and the walls were built around the city first by David, and then they were expanded by Solomon because he built a pathel and yada yada. It just grew. Mount Moriah is also where Jesus died on the cross. Now, Jesus obviously didn't die on the cross on the rock, but actually Jesus was crucified outside the walls of Jerusalem along the very north of Mount Moriah Ridge. So just a few hundred yards away. The rock, let's just continue with the rock. Where are we with the rock then? So next in history, guess what? The rock on Mount Moriah is believed by Muslims to be the place from which the prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven. Remember, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed and taken over. And so that's how they come into owning the rock. The most famous and oldest Islamic site is the Dome of the Rock, a shrine that was completed in 692, and it completely covers the rock to this day. Muslims also consider Abraham a prophet, remember, because he was Ishmael's father. However, instead of Abraham, in their story, the Quran, instead of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, their Quran suggests Ishmael, not Isaac, was the sacrificial son.
It's funny
story
how the
twists.
perspective of history changes.
Exactly. Now, the Jews have traditionally regarded the location of the stone inside the Dome of the Rock as the holiest spot on earth because it is where Isaac was almost sacrificed, and it is the site of the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple, where the Ark of the Covenant sat. And remember, only certain people could go into the Holy of Holies, or you were, I guess, kind of being blasphemous, because Muslim authorities have refused to permit Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. The Jews developed a custom of praying near the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. So now you understand, in Jerusalem, there's this wall. The Jews can only pray there. That's as close as they can get to what formerly was their Holy of Holies, the temple. And you can go in to the Temple Mount today, and I have put YouTubes in the notes for those people who really want to see this. You can actually, there's two. There is a video of the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock exterior of Mount Moriah. That is by a Jewish couple, and they actually weren't allowed in the Dome of the Rock. And then there's a video of the inside of the Dome of the Rock, and there is a picture of the rock inside the dome. So if you just want to look at a picture, you can. And there's also, like I said, that map. But so you can get it straight in your head, because it took a lot to get it straight in my head. To the Christians, so to the Jews, this is why this is so special to them. And this is why this is the most expensive, fought over piece of real estate in the world today. Because it's all about, this is our holy place versus this is your holy place, and who's allowed to do what. So anyone is allowed kind of on the Temple Mount, but Jews are not allowed to pray in the Dome of the Rock. And so they are prohibited from that. So it's kind of tense. And you're going to hear that in one of the videos, which was really cool to say. They said when you get through all this clearance you have to go through to actually get on the Temple Mount, which is this big, huge, stone, huge platform square that people can walk around, and you can also see a palace there and all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of tension, they said, because there's actually two kinds of police patrolling. There's Palestinian police and there's Israeli police. This is why this spot is important to Christians. It's where baby Jesus was presented in the temple, where he was found among the teachers at age 12, where he later prayed and taught and drove money changers out of the temple precincts. This is where the veil was rent, signifying that we don't have to have a high priest anymore, that Jesus is our high priest. So it is very much part of Christian heritage too. The Dome of the Rock, like I said, is the most sacred and disputed place in the world. It is holy place for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And you're going to want to take a look at those videos. Very cool. In case you may never go there, I would like to go there. But again, you don't know if you're going to get clearance to get in there, even if you go there.
Well, that's one of the things that I think is the coolest about about studying the Bible today is we have the internet.
Oh my gosh.
And I, all the time when I'm reading my Bible, I will stop and go Google whatever it is because I want to see that mountain. I want to see the volcano. I want to see whatever that was so that I can visualize it because I'm very visual. And it's just like a really cool thing that we get to be able to experience stuff in a way that we can't or wouldn't have the opportunity to.
No, Hayley kept saying, are you going to record 2 tonight? Because we really need to record 2. And I said, you don't understand. I have been on a deep dive on this. There are videos and archaeological digs. There was a refurbishing of the Dome with the Rock where they actually went underneath and found caverns. And this one archaeologist was allowed to look. And then it stopped. He couldn't go any further. They found so much fascinating history of that time. Underneath that Temple Mount is a treasure trove that we just may never be allowed to dig up. And it's so much history. And then there's so many things like that they have redone around that area. And they were literally bulldozing and throwing stuff over. And finally someone said, stop, you've got to stop. Let us sift through this. And so there have been a few archaeologists who have been allowed to do that. And again, you can YouTube those. It pained my heart to think that this most precious place that has so much spiritual history we've not been allowed to really preserve it and really look at what's underneath the Temple Mount and the rock and all the caverns. And it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to watch those videos now. And hopefully you're a history buff like we are. But even if you're not, and that was a lot of history for you,
TMI.
We apologize. But just know this is where it all went down.
Yeah, this is where it all went down. All right. Scene 3. Blessings again for Abraham. This is that well done, my good and faithful servant moment. I hope to have one day in heaven. He's going to get it right here. Abraham is.
Verse 15. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Nahor's sons. Sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother, Nahor, Uz the firstborn, Buz his brother Camil, the father of Aram, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jildath, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor. His concubine, whose name was Rimah, also had sons, Tebah, Gam, Tahash, and Makkah.
Okay, whenever we have a genealogy, we're teeing something up. And the tee up here is actually not for Genesis 23, but Genesis 24 next week, where we're going to have one of my favorite love stories in the Bible. So Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. And next week, it's all about Rebekah. And this is where she came from. But to close out this chapter, big picture, there were 2 heroes in this story, Abraham and God. And the 2 go hand in hand. Abraham, the obvious hero, the man who has learned to have faith in God, and God, the larger hero of this chapter and the entire book of the Bible, because it is God who provides the ram in this chapter and the lamb for us in the New Testament. And this chapter is the story of how God rescued Isaac, but it's also the Bible is the story of how God rescues us. Oof.
That was a lot.
Love that.
But it was
Love
good
that
stuff.
chapter. All right, we're going to do chapter 23 really quick. Scene 4.
Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, I am a foreigner and a stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site so I can bury my dead. The Hittites replied to Abraham, Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead. Then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land of Hittites. He said to them, If you are willing to let me bury my dead, listen to me and intercede with Ephron, son of Zahor, on my behalf, so he will sell me the cave of Mechalvath. which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you." Ephron the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. "No, my lord," he said, "listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead." Again, Abraham bowed low before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in their hearing, "Listen to me, if you will. I will pay the price for the field. Accept it from me so I can bury my dead there." Ephron answered Abraham, "Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what is that between you and me? Bury your dead." Abraham agreed to Ephron's. He's a stubborn old man, isn't he? Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weight current among the merchants. So Ephraim's field in Mechalaph, near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field, was deeded to Abraham and his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Mechalaph, near Mamre, which is Hebron, the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as a burial site.
Okay, so a lot of, bowing to each other. No, you, listen. They're just both honoring. But I do think it's kind of cool that, again, the Hittites are going to be a problem in the future, but Abraham has built a very good, honorable name for himself, and people are more than willing to let him have the best of everything. He does come to own another piece of land in Canaan, so he's planting his seeds everywhere he can. But what I really want to talk about in this chapter really quick is Sarah, because she is the only woman whose age, death, and burial is recorded in the scripture. We have a lot of lineage of a lot of guys, but she is the only one. And that was a huge distinction. She died at 127 years of age. So Isaac is about 37 years old. She is mentioned in the New Testament several times as an example to us, but my favorite is found in what I call the Faith Hall of Fame. and I'll probably always reference this on and off for years. Hebrews 11 is one of my favorite. I call it the Faith Hall of Fame because it starts out like this. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. So now we're in the New Testament, kicking it back to the Old Testament. And I love this, and is very much part of my adoption story because it really was a word from the Lord for me. And then it kind of lists, after it says that, all the greats who live by faith. And it goes through Abel and Enoch and Noah, whom we've already covered. It mentions Abraham in like 3 paragraphs. And then we get a mention of Sarah in verse 11. And by faith, even Sarah, who is past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. Sarah, for all her ornery, kind of selfish ways, or jealous ways, I should say, with Hagar, did come to believe the promise. And then it goes on to mention Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab, the only other woman. There's only 2 women in the list: Gideon, Barak, Samson, Japheth, David, Samuel, the prophets. And then it closes with this: these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. All of them had this promise they were looking forward to. We, in the New Testament life, have that promise because it was made perfect in Jesus. So only 2 women mentioned in the Hall of Fame, the Faith Hall of Fame. Sarah was the first, and she may have laughed in the beginning of her story, but in the end, she had faith.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning something that I learned from you, Susan, is that the book of Hebrews, which is what you were just reading from, was a writing urging some Christians that were thinking about going back to Judaism to not to stay the course and keep the faith. And the fact that you raised that verse of Hebrews 11, faith is confident in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see, that also is exactly what Abraham did on that 3-day journey and all the way up that mountain.
Oh, good point. That's so true. And this is why, we all read the New Testament so much more, or we hear about it so much more in the Old Testament, but you really can't make sense of the New Testament unless you know the Old Testament, because like this whole Hebrews, that's what they're referring to, is the ancients, as it said.
Yeah.
There's so much in the show notes this week. So take a look because you will really have fun watching those and figuring out all the places that in Israel that still are there today that are proof of everything we're learning.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go watch those. But here is what I would like every listener to do this week, or as you ponder this episode. What is your mountain? What mountain are you walking on right now, where you just need to have faith and confidence and know that God has you? Just follow him and do what he's telling you to do and watch what happens, because it's going to be a wild ride. What's a club without friends? If you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you can say, Welcome to the club. New episodes drop every Monday, and get all episodes now on Amazon Music. As always, head over to susanme.com/Bible Book Club for show notes from today's episode. Bible Book Club is hosted by Susan Merrill and Heather Rubio, edited by Buck Buchanan, produced by Hayley Mawat.